Detective Miller grabbed my arm as I was leaving the precinct that Tuesday evening. His grip was firm, urgent. "Don't go home tonight," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. His eyes held something I'd never seen before, fear. I laughed it off. "Come on, Mike. What's this about?" But he was already walking away, leaving me standing there confused and honestly a little annoyed. We'd known each other for 15 years. Our kids played together. Our wives were in the same book club. Mike Miller wasn't the type for dramatic jokes. I went home anyway. Of course I did. Who wouldn't? That was 3 weeks ago. Today, I'm standing at the back of St. Mary's Cathedral, watching them lower my neighbor Rebecca Chun into the ground, and I finally understand what Detective Miller was trying to tell me that night. The secret I discovered, it's the kind that destroys families, ruins careers, and apparently gets people killed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. It was a quiet suburban Tuesday when everything began unraveling. I had just finished my evening jog, same route I'd taken for 8 years through Maple Grove subdivision. Past the Johnsons' perfectly manicured lawn, around the corner where old Mrs. Patterson always waved from her kitchen window, and finally down Elm Street, where Rebecca Chun lived in the blue colonial with white shutters. Rebecca was, well, she was the kind of neighbor everyone loved. She brought homemade cookies when you moved in, organized the annual block party, and somehow always knew when someone was going through a rough patch. Her husband, David, was a prominent surgeon at Presbyterian Hospital, and their teenage daughter Sophie was heading to Princeton in the fall. That Tuesday evening, I noticed something odd. Rebecca's car was in the driveway, but every light in the house was off. It was only 7:30. The Chens were early birds. Sure, but not that early. As I slowed to a walk in front of their house, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A woman's voice, muffled but desperate, coming from somewhere inside. "Please, I won't tell anyone, please." I should have called 911 immediately. Instead, I found myself creeping closer to their front window. The blinds were drawn, but there was a small gap near the bottom. What I saw through that gap would haunt me for weeks. Rebecca was on her knees in the living room, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Standing over her was a figure I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. But I could hear his voice clearly now, calm, almost conversational. "You should have minded your own business, Rebecca. Some secrets are worth killing for." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, the figure moved into the light, and I saw his face. It was Detective Mike Miller. My Mike Miller. My neighbor, my friend, the man who coached Little League with me and grilled burgers at neighborhood barbecues. I dropped to the ground behind their hedge, my heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it through the walls. Think, I told myself. Think clearly. This couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be an explanation. But Rebecca's terrified whisper cut through my denial. "Mike, we've been friends for years. David performed surgery on your colleagues. You know us. You know we're good people." "Good people," Miller laughed bitterly. "Good people don't threaten to expose corruption that goes all the way to the mayor's office. Good people don't have photos of evidence lockers being emptied. Good people know when to keep their mouths shut. Photos. Evidence lockers." Suddenly, pieces started clicking into place. Rebecca worked as a volunteer coordinator at the courthouse. She had access to areas most civilians never saw. And lately, she'd been asking strange questions at our neighborhood gatherings, questions about police procedures, about evidence handling, about how long files were supposed to be kept. I'd assumed she was just curious. Now I realized she'd been investigating. "The drug bust on 5th Street last month." Rebecca's voice was stronger now, defiant despite her fear. 60,000 in cash, 2 kilos of cocaine. But only 20,000 and half a kilo made it into evidence. "I have pictures, Mike. Time-stamped pictures." Miller was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "You should have brought this to me privately. We could have worked something out." "You mean I should have helped you cover it up?" "Mike, people are dying. That missing money, those missing drugs, they're going right back onto the streets. How many overdoses could we prevent if—" The sound of a gunshot cut through the night. I lay there behind the hedge, paralyzed with shock and terror. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Eventually, I heard Miller's car start up and drive away. Only then did I dare to move. I called 911 from my cell phone, disguising my voice and reporting shots fired at the Chin residence. Then I ran home, locked every door, and spent the night staring out my bedroom window, waiting for Miller to come for me. He never did, because as far as he knew, there were no witnesses. The next morning, the official story was that Rebecca Chun had surprised a burglar. She'd been shot once in the chest with her own legally registered firearm, a .38 she kept for protection. The burglar had apparently panicked and fled without taking anything. Detective Mike Miller was assigned as the lead investigator. I watched from my living room window as he stood in the Chen's driveway, giving interviews to local news stations. He played the part perfectly, the dedicated detective promising justice for a beloved community member. "We will find whoever did this," he said, looking directly into the camera. Rebecca Chen was a pillar of his community. She deserves justice, and her family deserves answers. The irony was sickening. David Chen was devastated. Sophie came home from Princeton immediately. The funeral was planned for the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after I'd watched Miller murder Rebecca in cold blood. But here's what Miller didn't know. Rebecca had been smarter than he gave her credit for. 3 days after the murder, I received an envelope in my mail. No return address, postmarked the day before Rebecca died. Inside was a note in her handwriting. "Tom, if something happens to me, there's a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Key is taped under the loose board in my garden shed, behind the fertilizer bags. Box number 247. Tell David the combination is Sophie's birthday, plus our wedding anniversary. The truth needs to come out. R." My hands trembled as I read it. Rebecca had suspected she was in danger. She'd made contingency plans. But I was terrified. Miller had killed once to protect his secret. He wouldn't hesitate to kill again. I thought about my wife, Sarah, my twin daughters, who were only 12. I couldn't risk their lives. So I did nothing. For 6 agonizing days, I carried that secret while watching Miller orchestrate the investigation into his own crime. The funeral was on a gray, drizzling Tuesday morning. Half the town showed up. Rebecca really had touched that many lives. I sat near the back with Sarah, watching David and Sophie in the front row, their grief raw and devastating. Miller sat 3 rows ahead of us, in his dress uniform. During the service, he even stood up to give a eulogy. "Rebecca Chen was the heart of our community," he said, his voice breaking with what seemed like genuine emotion. "She believed in justice, in doing what's right, even when it was difficult. As the detective investigating her case, I promise you this. I won't rest until her killer is brought to justice." The congregation murmured their approval. I felt physically sick. After the service, as people were gathering at the cemetery for the burial, David Chin approached me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gaunt with grief. "Tom, Rebecca mentioned you a few times in the last weeks before she died. She said you were someone she trusted, someone with integrity." I could barely meet his eyes. "David, I'm so sorry for your loss." "There's something I need to tell you," he whispered, glancing around to make sure we couldn't be overheard. Rebecca was working on something that had her scared. She wouldn't tell me details, but she said if anything happened to her, there were people I could trust to help find the truth. He pressed something into my hand. "She said to give this to you if something ever happened." I looked down. It was a small brass key. She said you'd know what to do with it. My heart was racing. Rebecca had somehow known I'd witnessed her murder. But how? Then I remembered. Every evening when I jogged past her house, she'd wave from her kitchen window. The same kitchen window that faced the spot where I'd hidden behind their hedge. She must have seen me there that night, in those final moments before Miller shot her. She'd planned for this. That evening, after Sarah and the girls were asleep, I drove to the Chin house. The crime scene tape was gone, but the house stood empty and dark. David and Sophie were staying at his sister's place across town. I found the loose board in the garden shed exactly where Rebecca had described. My hands were shaking as I pried up the wood and felt around until my fingers found the small key taped underneath. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to First National Bank. Box number 247 was registered under Rebecca's name. The combination, Sophie's birthday plus their wedding anniversary, opened it easily. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, time-stamped images of evidence lockers being opened after hours. Pictures of evidence bags being switched. Screenshots of financial transactions showing money being moved between accounts. And at the bottom of the stack, a comprehensive list of names, dates, and dollar amounts spanning 3 years. Miller wasn't working alone. The corruption involved 6 other officers, 2 evidence clerks, and this made my blood run cold. Deputy Mayor Harrison, who'd been laundering money through a series of shell companies. But the most damning piece of evidence was a USB drive containing audio recordings. Rebecca had been wearing a wire during her final conversations with several of the conspirators. The last recording was dated the day she died. I plugged it into my laptop and listened to Rebecca's voice, knowing these were probably among her last words. I gave them one final chance to come clean. I told Miller I'd go to the FBI if he didn't turn himself in within 48 hours. I could see in his eyes that he'd already made his choice. If something happens to me, Tom, please make sure this gets to the right people. Don't trust anyone in the local police department. The corruption goes too deep. She'd known. She'd known Miller would kill her, and she'd planned for it. I spent the next 2 days making copies of everything and figuring out how to get the evidence to someone I could trust. Finally, I decided on Agent Sarah Rodriguez from the FBI's regional office. I'd met her at a community policing seminar the previous year, and she'd impressed me as someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. But Miller was getting suspicious. 3 days after the funeral, he showed up at my door. "Tom, good to see you," he said with that same friendly smile I'd known for years. "Mind if I come in? I want to ask you a few questions about Rebecca." My throat went dry. "Of course." Sarah's got coffee on. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where our families had shared dozens of meals together. Miller's uniform was perfectly pressed, his badge gleaming. He looked like the epitome of an honest cop. "I'm canvassing the neighborhood one more time," he said, pulling out a notebook. "Just trying to make sure we didn't miss anything." "You jog past the Chun house most evenings, right?" "Yeah, usually around 7 or 7:30. "The night Rebecca was killed, Tuesday the 15th, do you remember seeing anything unusual? Any strange cars? Anyone who didn't belong?" I forced myself to look him in the eyes. "No, nothing unusual. I actually cut my jog short that night. Sarah wasn't feeling well, so I came home early." It was a lie, of course, but Miller couldn't know I'd been there. He nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "What time did you get home?" "Around 6:30, I think." Another nod. "And you were home the rest of the evening?" "Yeah, Sarah can confirm that." Miller smiled, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I'm sure she can." "Well, thanks for your time, Tom. If you remember anything else, give me a call." As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "Oh, and Tom, be careful out there during your evening jogs. We still don't know if this burglar is planning to hit other houses in the neighborhood. Might want to vary your route for a while. Or better yet, stick close to home after dark." The message was clear. He knew. That night was when Miller cornered me at the police station and told me not to go home. I realized now that he was testing me, seeing how I'd react. When I went home anyway, I proved I wasn't taking his threat seriously. That was his mistake. Because that night, I uploaded everything to 3 different cloud storage accounts and sent encrypted copies to Agent Rodriguez with a note explaining everything I'd witnessed. I also wrote a detailed confession and sealed it in an envelope addressed to the FBI, with instructions for my attorney to deliver it if anything happened to me. Miller must have been planning to kill me that night. Maybe he was waiting for me to fall asleep, or maybe he was going to stage another burglary gone wrong. But Agent Rodriguez's team moved faster than he expected. They arrested Miller at 4:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, along with 6 other officers and Deputy Mayor Harrison. The evidence Rebecca had gathered was overwhelming. Standing here at Rebecca's graveside now, watching them lower her coffin into the ground, I can't help but think about the courage it took for her to do what she did. She knew the risks. She knew these people would kill to protect their secrets. But she also knew that staying silent would mean more drugs on the streets, more overdoses, more families destroyed by the corruption she'd uncovered. David Chin approaches me as the crowd begins to disperse. His eyes are clearer today, his grief now mixed with something else, pride in his wife's bravery, and satisfaction that justice is finally being served. "Agent Rodriguez told me what you did," he says quietly. "About the evidence, about testifying. Rebecca would be proud." Sophie joins us, her Princeton sweatshirt damp from the drizzle. She always said the truth has a way of coming out, she says, even when people try to bury it. Miller's trial starts next month. With Rebecca's evidence and my eyewitness testimony, the prosecution is confident they'll get convictions on all charges. The corruption ring she exposed stole over $2 million and put an estimated 40 pounds of confiscated drugs back on the streets. How many lives could have been saved if they'd just done their jobs, honestly? But there's something else I haven't told you yet. Something that makes the story even more twisted. 2 days after the arrests, Agent Rodriguez called me in for one final interview. She had something to show me. Security footage from the bank where Rebecca's safety deposit box was located. We pulled all the surveillance from the week before Rebecca's murder, Rodriguez explained, sliding a laptop across the table. Watch this. The footage showed Rebecca entering the bank on Monday morning, the day before Miller killed her. But she wasn't alone. Following about 20 feet behind her, trying to look casual, was Deputy Mayor Harrison. He was tracking her movements, Rodriguez continued. We found records showing he'd been monitoring her phone calls, her internet searches, even her credit card purchases. They knew exactly what she was doing. This changed everything. Rebecca hadn't just stumbled onto their corruption, they'd been watching her investigate them for weeks. Her murder wasn't a panicked response to being discovered. It was a calculated execution. There's more, Rodriguez said, clicking to another video file. This is from the courthouse, 3 days before she died. The new footage showed Rebecca in conversation with someone I recognized but couldn't immediately place. Then it hit me. It was Officer Janet Torres, one of the 6 officers arrested with Miller. We enhanced the audio, Rodriguez said, hitting play. Rebecca's voice came through clearly. Janet, I know you're involved, but you're not like the others. You have children. Think about what kind of world you want them to grow up in. Torres looked terrified. Rebecca, you don't understand. If I talk, they'll kill me. They'll kill my family. Then help me stop them. Before more people get hurt. Torres shook her head frantically. I can't. I'm sorry I can't. She walked away, leaving Rebecca standing alone in the courthouse hallway. That afternoon, Torres had called Miller and told him about the conversation. So you see, Rodriguez said, Rebecca knew she was running out of time. She knew they were closing in on her. But she also knew Torres was weak link. That's why her final recording includes instructions for us to offer Torres immunity in exchange for her testimony. Even in her final hours, Rebecca had been thinking 3 steps ahead. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every detail of what I'd witnessed that night. The defense tried to paint me as an unreliable witness, someone who'd misinterpreted what he'd seen in the dark. But Rebecca's recordings were devastating. Her voice, calm and clear, explaining every detail of the corruption she'd uncovered. The jury heard Miller's own words on that final recording. Some secrets are worth killing for. Torres took the stand on the 4th week. She broke down completely, sobbing as she described how the corruption ring had operated. They'd been skimming money and drugs from evidence lockers for 3 years. The profits were split among the conspirators, with Deputy Mayor Harrison laundering the money through fake construction contracts. We told ourselves it wasn't hurting anyone, Torres testified. The drugs were going to be destroyed anyway. The money was just sitting there. But then people started asking questions, and Mike said we had to do whatever it took to protect ourselves. Including murder? The prosecutor asked. Torres nodded, tears streaming down her face. He said Rebecca was going to destroy all our families, our careers, our children's futures. He made it sound like we didn't have a choice. The prosecutor pulled out a photograph, one of the images from Rebecca's safety deposit box. It showed Torres removing evidence bags from a locker after hours. Did you have a choice when you participated in this theft, Officer Torres? Yes, she whispered. Yes, I had a choice. And I chose wrong. Miller never testified in his own defense. His lawyer tried to argue that I was mistaken about what I'd seen, that Rebecca had actually surprised a real burglar who happened to look like his client in the dark. But on the final day of testimony, the prosecution played Rebecca's last recording one more time. Her voice filled the courtroom. If you're hearing this, it means they've killed me. But it also means Tom did what I asked him to do. Tom, I know this has been hard on you and your family. I know you never wanted to be involved in this. But you were the only person I trusted to see this through. I looked across the courtroom at Miller. For the first time since his arrest, he was looking directly at me. No more fake smiles. No more neighborly pretense. Just cold hatred in his eyes. The truth is worth fighting for, Rebecca's voice continued. Even when it's dangerous. Even when it costs us everything. Because if good people don't stand up to corruption, if we don't protect each other, then the criminals have already won. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all charges. Miller got life without parole. Harrison got 25 years. The other officers received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Torres, because of her cooperation and genuine remorse, got 3 years probation and community service. She lost her job and her pension, but she was alive. Her children still had their mother. But the story doesn't end there. 6 months after the convictions, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a letter from David Chun and a small velvet box. Tom, the letter read, Sophie and I are finally ready to move forward. We're selling the house and starting fresh in another state. But before we go, we wanted you to have this. Inside the box was Rebecca's wedding ring, along with a note in her handwriting that I'd never seen before. David, if something happens to me, please give my ring to Tom. Not because he was involved in the investigation, but because he reminded me every day that there are still good people in the world. His evening jogs past our house, his friendly waves, his kindness to our family, these small acts of human decency gave me hope that what I was doing mattered. Tell him that hope is worth fighting for. R. I sat in my kitchen, holding that ring, and finally allowed myself to cry. For Rebecca. For David and Sophie. For the families destroyed by the corruption. For the victims who would never get justice. And yes, for myself. For the nightmares I still had, for the way I jumped every time I heard footsteps behind me during my evening jogs. But also for the fact that it was over. The truth had come out. Justice had been served. And somehow, despite everything, hope had survived. 3 years have passed since that night. I still take my evening jogs through the neighborhood, though the route has changed slightly. The new family, living in Rebecca's old house, has 2 young children who play in the front yard. Sometimes I stop to chat with them, and they remind me that life goes on, that hope continues to grow even in places where darkness once lived. Sarah and I talk sometimes about moving to a different neighborhood, starting fresh somewhere else. But this is our home. This is where we learned that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over comfort. Last month, I got a call from Agent Rodriguez. She's been promoted to head a new task force investigating corruption in small-town police departments. Rebecca's case became a model for how to handle these situations, how to protect witnesses, how to follow evidence even when it leads to people you trust. We've used Rebecca's methods in 12 other cases, Rodriguez told me. Her planning, her attention to detail, her courage, it's saved lives, Tom. She's still making a difference. The Chin house sold finally. David and Sophie sent me a Christmas card from Colorado, where Sophie is now a sophomore at the University of Denver studying criminal justice. She wants to be a prosecutor, David wrote. She says she wants to make sure people like her mother are never silenced. As for Miller, he's serving his life sentence at the state penitentiary, 2 hours north of here. I've never visited him, and I never will. But I heard through Agent Rodriguez that he finally admitted his guilt during a parole hearing last year. Not that it mattered, since he's never getting out. He said something that stuck with me, though. I thought I was protecting my family, my career, my future. But in the end, I destroyed everything that mattered. Rebecca Chin was a better person than I ever was, and she died proving it. His wife divorced him 6 months after the trial. His kids changed their last name and moved across the country with their mother. The house where we'd shared so many barbecues and birthday parties was foreclosed on. His entire life, everything he thought he was protecting, crumbled anyway. Meanwhile, the corruption task force Rebecca's case inspired has shut down similar rings in 17 different cities. 17. Imagine how many lives that's saved, how many families that's protected from the poison of dirty money and planted evidence. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about recognition. The recognition that some people choose to stand for what's right, even when it costs them everything. But there's one more thing I need to tell you. Something I discovered just last week that makes this whole story even more incredible. I was cleaning out my garage when I found an old box of neighborhood newsletters from 5 years ago. You know, those little community bulletins that get delivered with the mail. I was about to throw them away when I noticed an article Rebecca had written about community safety. In it, she wrote, "Our neighborhood is only as safe as our willingness to watch out for each other. Sometimes the most dangerous threats come from places we least expect. But if we stay vigilant, if we document what we see, and if we have the courage to speak up when something isn't right, we can protect our families and our community from any threat." She'd been preparing for this fight for years, not just gathering evidence against Miller and his crew, but mentally preparing herself to be the kind of person who wouldn't look the other way when she discovered corruption. That newsletter article was published 3 years before she stumbled onto the evidence tampering. 3 years before she started investigating. She wasn't just a victim who got unlucky. She was someone who'd already decided that protecting her community was worth any risk. I found another article from 2 years later, after she started volunteering at the courthouse. Real community safety comes from holding everyone accountable, our neighbors, our leaders, and yes, even our police officers. Trust must be earned, not assumed. Reading those words gave me chills. Rebecca hadn't just stumbled into this fight. She'd walked into it with her eyes wide open, knowing exactly what she might have to sacrifice. The night she died, when Miller had her on her knees with her hands zip-tied, she wasn't just begging for her life. She was completing a mission she'd started years earlier. A mission to prove that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they choose to use it. If you're listening to this story, remember Rebecca Chun. Remember that corruption thrives in silence, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones wearing badges, the ones we trust to protect us. But also remember that for every corrupt officer like Miller, there are 10 good ones who choose to serve with honor. For every politician like Harrison who sells out his community, there are others who fight for justice even when it's difficult. The world isn't divided into good people and criminals. It's divided into those who choose courage when it matters, and those who choose comfort when courage is needed. Rebecca chose courage. Even knowing it would cost her life, she chose to fight for truth. And in the end, that choice changed everything. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button and share the story. Because Rebecca's legacy isn't just about the corruption ring she exposed. It's about the reminder that each of us has a choice to make when we witness injustice. We can look the other way, mind our own business, and hope someone else will handle it. Or we can do what Rebecca did. We can document the truth, protect the evidence, and trust that good people will step forward when it matters. We can look the other way, mind our own business, and hope someone else will handle it. Or we can do what Rebecca did. We can document the truth, protect the evidence, and trust that good people will step forward when it matters. And here's what Rebecca's story taught me about the signs we should never ignore. When your neighbors start asking unusual questions about police procedures, pay attention. When someone who's usually social becomes secretive about their activities, pay attention. When a friend mentions feeling like they're being watched or followed, pay attention. Rebecca tried to tell people she was scared. David mentioned that she'd been acting differently in the weeks before her death. More cautious, more protective of Sophie. She started walking different routes to work, checking her rearview mirror constantly, even asking David to install new locks on their doors. The signs were there, but everyone assumed she was just being paranoid. If someone in your life is showing these signs, especially if they're involved in any kind of investigation or whistleblowing, don't dismiss their fears. Help them document everything. Help them create safety plans. And most importantly, help them understand that they don't have to face the danger alone. Rebecca's greatest mistake wasn't investigating the corruption. It was trying to handle it completely by herself until it was almost too late. If she'd involved more people earlier, if she created a network of trusted allies instead of bearing the burden alone, she might still be alive today. But her death wasn't in vain if we learn from it. If we become the community she was trying to protect, a community that watches out for each other, that doesn't look the other way when something's wrong, that supports the brave people who speak up about injustice. I keep Rebecca's wedding ring in a small frame on my desk, next to a photo of her from the last neighborhood barbecue she attended. In the picture, she's laughing at something Sophie said, her arm around David, looking completely at peace. She had no idea she only had 3 weeks to live. But even if she had known, I believe she would have made the same choices. Because that was who Rebecca Chen was, someone who chose love over fear, truth over comfort, courage over safety. Sometimes the detective whispers, "Don't go home tonight," because he's planning to kill you. But sometimes, going home anyway is exactly what you need to do to find the key to everything. Rebecca taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do what's right despite the fear. And that's a lesson worth living for, worth fighting for, worth dying for if it comes to that. But more than anything, it's a lesson worth sharing. So please, share Rebecca's story. Because somewhere out there, someone else might be facing the same impossible choice she faced. And they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. They need to know that the truth will come out. And they need to know that there are still people like you, people who care enough to listen to stories like this, who care enough to remember names like Rebecca Chen, who care enough to believe that justice is worth fighting for.